The General Tian Ji was a great lover of horses. He bred horses, he rode horses, he raced horses, he bet on horse races. And in this respect, he was very similar to a great many Chinese people of the ancient and, of course, still of the modern world, for they were a great betting race, a great lover of horse flesh. And Tian Ji had had many accomplishments in his life. He was a famed general. He had defeated many an army in battle. He had defeated many people in arguments behind the closed doors of the battle rooms where they sit and argue strategy with each other. But one thing he had not defeated in the 3 years in which he and King Wei had been racing horses against each other in a friendly fashion, you understand. Except, of course, they love to bet, and when there is money at stake, friendship is apt to be tried a little bit, be tested a little bit. In all those 3 years, the general had never actually won a horse race. Every single time, without fail, the king's horses had won. And the general had lost so much money, and the general's friends had lost so much money betting in his favour and losing against the king. It was starting to become embarrassing. And whilst defeating kings can come with its own bit of a cost, obviously, if you do it once too often, they tend to get a little bit upset. Nonetheless, the general, Tian Ji, felt that it would spice up their rivalry, their friendly rivalry, if occasionally he actually won. One of his horses came in. And he thought of a dozen different ways to achieve this, and not one of them had worked. Not one. And at length he thought to himself, when I am stumped upon the field of battle, which doesn't happen very often, but when it happens and I am stumped, I go and seek the counsel of the great sage Sun Bin. Maybe I should do the same now. And so he went down to the house of Sun Bin. And there the old man was sitting on a chair enjoying a little sun. And he saw his friend approaching, he hailed, and he couldn't stand and bow because his legs had ceased to work many a long year ago. But he inclined his head in respect to the general, who inclined his head in return. And the servants brought a chair so the general could sit next to the sage, and the two men chatted amicably, and they drank tea and supped a little of food. And at length, politenesses duly done, the general turned to the subject matter at hand, and he explained that he had been defeated again and again and again by the king. And Sun Bin had lost a little bit of money betting in favour of his friend against the king's horses, so he knew perfectly well the nature of the problem. And he told him of the dozen different ways he had tried to overcome the king's horses, and how each and every one of them had failed. He said to Sun Bin, my friend, do you have any advice in the infinite wisdom of your life and your knowledge and your experience? And Sun Bin said, it is better for a sage to pronounce upon the river if they sit at the river bank than if they sit at a great distance. If your servants will wheel me up in my cart, for since the days when his legs had ceased to work, Sun Bin had gone everywhere in a wheeled wooden cart pulled by servants. If they will wheel me up to your stables tomorrow, I will sit and I will watch and I will contemplate, and I will allow the spirit of the world, ironically given the name of the king is called Wu Wei, to go with the flow and see where the knowledge and the wisdom takes me, and then I will advise accordingly. And so, of course, that is exactly what happened. The very next day, the servants came, they wheeled him up, they parked his wooden wagon outside the stables and the racetrack. They brought him a comfortable chair to sit in, and some rice wine and a little to eat. And there he sat, enjoying another day of sun, and watching the horses gallop past. And the comings and goings of the jockeys and the stable boys and the various other people attached to the General's horse emporium, if we can call it such. And he sat there for half an hour and he watched. And then the General came out and spoke to him, and they chatted at length, and they drank a little wine together, and they ate a little food together. And finally the General said, well, you have had a little while to sit and watch the comings and goings of my river of horses, as you might have called it yesterday, and allow the Wu Wei to flow through you. Where does your flow take you, to advise me? And Sun Bin said, before I answer your question, will you answer a question for me? And the General said, of course, my friend. And the old man said, there are 3 buildings over on the far side of the racetrack. There is a stable block for horses there, and all of the doors are painted bright red. And there is a stable block for the horses there, and all of the doors are painted bright blue. And there is a stable block for the horses down there, and all of the doors are painted green. Why is each block painted with different coloured doors? Ah, an easy one to answer, said the General. You see, my very best horses sleep in the stable block with the bright red doors. Red for good fortune and good luck, of course. Of course. My second best horses, they're still pretty good, but they're not as good as the ones behind the red doors, dwell in the stable block with the blue doors. And the horses that are not quite as good as that, my least efficient horses, are in the stable block down there with the green doors. I see, said Sun Bin. Well, that does make sense. And tell me, when the king brings out, for your races, when he brings out his very best horses, which horses do you bring out? The reds, the blues, or the greens? The reds, of course, said Tian Ji, as if the old man must have lost his marbles. I pit my best horses against his best horses. And the kings win. Indeed, said the General, the kings win. And tell me, my friend, when the king brings out his second best horses, which of your horses do you bring out? The ones in the blue doors or the ones in the green doors? Well, of course, for his second best horses, I bring out my second best horses, the ones from the blue door. And so on, said the General. When the king goes down to his least efficient horses, I bring out my least efficient horses. But every single time, the kings win. Well, said Sun Bin, the flow of wisdom, the grain of the world, which we must follow, or you must follow, if you are to win, is this. In 2 days' time, I believe you have another race set with the king. When he brings out his very best horses, you bring out your worst horses. What? Said the General. They'll lose. They're losing anyway, said Sun Bin. Bring out your worst horses, the ones behind the green door. When the king brings out his second best horses, you bring out your best horses from the red doors. And when the king brings out his worst horses, you bring out your second best horses from the blue doors. That way you'll win 2 races out of 3. The General thought about this and wondered why on earth he hadn't thought of it himself. It wasn't as good as winning all 3 races, but 2 out of 3 is pretty damn good when you've not won a race for 3 years. The 2 days passed. The usual crowds of onlookers gathered to sit in the seating overlooking the racetracks. The bets were placed, much rice wine was drunk. The old sage was wheeled up by the servants and parked his wagon just next to the seating area where all of the local dignitaries parked their backsides and cushions, and the king brought out his very best horses. And Sun Bin could see the general twitching and agitated and tempted, so tempted to bring out his very best horses as he always did. But he had taken advice from the sage and he was determined to follow it, though it cost him a lot emotionally. But follow it he did. A quick whispered word with one of his jockeys, and the worst of the 3 stable blocks of horses was brought out. The king's horse took off, the general's horse took off, they raced and they raced and they raced, and of course the king's horse won by quite a margin. And all of the people in the seating areas would bet, as they always did after 3 years of the same thing every time, bet upon the king's horses, cheered and clapped and rejoiced. They had not won a huge amount because, of course, the people who organised all of the gambling knew perfectly well how it was going to go and offered very low odds to the king's horses. The second part of the race was held, and the king brought out his second best horses, and Tian Ji, following the advice of the stage, had placed a sizable bet. I mean, he always did in Venice, but he placed an even more sizable bet this time on his own horse winning. And the 2 horses raced off, the second best horse of the king and the first best horse of Tian Ji, and they raced and they raced and they raced and they galloped and they galloped and they galloped, and of course Tian Ji's very best horse won by a sizable nose against the king's second best. And there was a gasp from the audience watching in the seating area, and people were ripping up their bets and chucking them in the air, and the general had a big smile on his face, and so did the old sage, for both of them had placed bets and both of them knew that they had won. And the third round came, and the king's face, which was turning like thunder, summons for his least efficient horses, and the general brought out his second best horses, and they raced and they raced and they raced, and of course the second best horses won against the third best horses. And the king was much put out, unfairly, because he'd won 3 years worth of races, so to just lose this twice in a row was not that big of a shock, but it put his nose out a little bit. But he took comfort in the fact that he'd won the first race. And so the general kept his head and was able to cash in his sizable bets, as was Sun Bin able to cash in his sizable bets, and the 2 were happy and content, and the general had a technique which he could wheel out whenever he felt it was safe to discombobulate the king. A tale of horses from China to mark the year of the horse. Thank you.